having a different body can shows the creativity of the human form. And not that, sometimes function can be limited in certain kinds of ways. I don't want to take away that, but also like, with my mouth, some people who have read the memoir are like, but that's just your mouth. That's just Kate's mouth. And I'm like, yeah, it's just my mouth and it's not ugly. It's a different expression of the human experience.
Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. This week I'm joined by Kate Gies. Kate is a writer based in Toronto. She's written her memoir. It just came out at the beginning of the year. It's called It Must Be Beautiful to Be Finished, a memoir of my body. This book is incredible. Born without a right ear, Kate underwent 14 reconstructive surgeries to achieve the appearance of an outer ear. Today we talk about her experience in the medical system, finding community, and we talk all about her new memoir. It's a fantastic conversation. I absolutely love Kate. I hope you enjoy it. This podcast is brought to you by TELUS Smart Home Security. Secure, simplify, and easily monitor your home from anywhere using the Smart Home Security app. Visit TELUS.com/smarthome-security to learn more about Canada's most trusted security provider. Hi, Kate. It is so good to see you.
Hi, Tamara. Lovely to be here.
So your new book is called It Must Be Beautiful to Be Finished. It's the most beautiful cover I've ever seen, a memoir of my body. I'm halfway through. It is incredible and very personal. And the way you have written it is, it's so, it is these short bits of moments in your life that are life-altering, who have made you who you are today. Why did you want to write this book? It's so personal.
I think there's a part of me that always wanted to write this book, from a pretty young age. I think ultimately writing this book was for me a way to let go of shame for my own body. I think I've held on to a lot of shame. I've hidden that side of myself. I was born without a right ear. And I needed to reconnect with my body. I needed to have a relationship with my body. And so I think it was going back to kind of piece together this history. And also piece together why I had that shame around my body. And I think that was kind of important. And I think medical trauma is something we don't talk about enough or a lot. And I think we assume, things happen in a sterilized professional environment. How can that be trauma? And whether, in my case, the surgeries weren't necessary, but even when it is, the body, has a crisis response to being cut into and these kinds of things. And I don't think it's something that we talk about enough. And I think in the writing of it, I, discovered, wait a second, all of these things that happened, this was, kind of bonkers. All of these kinds of things. And this idea of the medical institution defining my body. And that's sort of what came out of the writing. But the first impetus was I felt I couldn't live in my body anymore and I needed to reconnect.
Wow. And I mean, I found it really you open up with, you were a baby born, beautiful baby girl born, in your mother's arms, but not taken away right away, looked at, examined. And so you talk about shame, as we're taught shame. We're taught to shame our bodies. We're taught to shame who we are. We don't even know that. How could you know that as a little girl that anything was different than you? But you were told something was different. You were told it had to be fixed. Your parents were told it had to be fixed. And I mean, there's some really raw moments, especially at the beginning where, your mom is yelling at them to stop what they're doing to you, and I found it so hard to read because I was feeling pain for you, but I was also feeling pain for your mother.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, you know, right when I was born, and I think we live in a society that the first person they point to is the mother. What happened? What went wrong? They asked my mom, did you do drugs? Did you drink when you were pregnant? And of course, like, so pretty very early on, she had this immense amount of guilt too. And the scene you're talking about near the beginning of the book, the first set of surgeries were to take like a skin graft, which turned out to be this big square wound from my buttocks, and put it up here. And then they were going to insert plastic in the ear. And then we had gone to get the bandage removed on my buttocks, but it turns out that bandage was supposed to melt into my skin. And so I was screaming essentially, and she kind of stepped in, which she did many other times, like throughout these surgeries. As you get further into the book, um, she was kind of, in a very hard position of being my protector, but also wanting the best for me. And of course, she was told that the best was, what if she gets made fun of, which I think is such a big um, thing that people talk about, that parents worry about. Like, what are other people going to think? And so I think, and the doctors were like, we can fix this. So of course you want the best for your child. So I think that she was in a very hard position for sure.
But just so everyone understands, they weren't uh, building you a new ear so that you could hear. This was, um, uh, I guess, would you call it cosmetic? Or it was, I mean, so here you are, a little girl, and your mom, and the two of you were being told, "Oh, we can fix her," but it wasn't. It was only to make other people feel better. Really, at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's to assuage other people's fears that bodies can be different. And I think, it taps into some, fear for people that we don't have control. And I think at the time it was, we don't want her to be teased. We want the world to love her as much as we do. And that seemed to be the option. We'll create the appearance of an ear, so that she looks like she fits in.
Right. Right. You had a lot of surgeries.
I did. 14.
I That's really hard to comprehend.
Yeah. Yeah. It started off. So I started off in Kingston, Ontario, and the first 5 happened there, where they were going to put a plastic ear in and then take my own skin and cover it up. And my body rejected it twice. And so the next step was to go to Sick Kids in Toronto, Hospital for Sick Children. And the next step was to build an ear out of my rib cartilage, and like create sort of like the helix of an ear, and a few of those surgeries also failed, with ending up being an emerge. And yeah, so it was a lot, and it would have been more. But eventually I had had enough.
So your first surgery, you were 4, right?
This 4. Yeah.
Um, is that when you knew that you were, and when I say different, I don't mean different. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Because they were telling you you were different. So at what point did you clue in and go, "Wait a minute here, like there's something different about me?" Like
Yeah, and it's such an interesting thing. Like, I don't know of a time, it's before my memories have formed, that I knew I was different from, I learned about that the same time I came from Kingston, Ontario, that, like, all of these other things were happening in the same space. And so my earliest memory is my mother. We were in the kitchen, and it's a very fuzzy memory, but she's saying, "Oh, you're going to have an operation." And then she gives me this hug. And I remember that hug worrying me because I'm like, there's something going on here. So I think as a young child, I always knew I needed to quote unquote be fixed. I needed to have this year. There was never really a time that I didn't know that. Um, when you're really young, you don't necessarily incorporate that into your sense of self, I think, until you're just a little bit older. And then all of a sudden, not only do you need to be quote unquote fixed, but yeah, there's something really wrong with you as a person. I think, and especially I've spoken about this before. The worst time to be alive is grade 8, I think. Um,
100%.
yeah. you know and I think it's a girl, and I think having this physical difference, and that's, I think, when it really, like, around that, like around grade 6 to grade 8, like really being like, oh, this also means I'm less than a person. Like, it also means I'm a freak. It also means I'm ugly or not worth it, or like those kinds of ideas sort of came in. And I think that's an age where, like, what your body looks like is becomes so much a part of your self-esteem at those years.
Well, our bodies are changing so much during that time too, right? Like some people are getting breasts, some people aren't. Some people are getting their periods, some people aren't. Some people, and so you start looking around, going, "Oh, wait a minute, I haven't done that yet. I haven't done that yet." And so you can't help it. But then if you actually do have something that you'd already had how many surgeries by that time, right? So you already knew may have already been carrying some well, self-awareness for sure, right? About, okay, yeah, and now I've got all these other things to worry about too, to fit in, because all we ever want to do is fit in. And it's so interesting to me how we all want to be like everybody else. When the older we get, we realize that's impossible. It's just never going to happen. And it's okay. And actually, it's kind of better.
100%, 100%. I think, like, there was a time when, and I mean, there were times too, my doctors when I was younger that used these big words to describe me that made me feel bad. But, like, I think, like, junior high, high school time, it's like all I wanted to do was make myself as small as possible. That's what I wanted to be. And then not realize, as I got older, like, I mean, I love color and I love all of these kinds of other things. But at the time, it was like how to be almost unnoticeable so that people wouldn't bully me, or people wouldn't, like, think to look at me in any kind of way.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, I mean, we do this with people, right? Whether somebody is a different weight than us, or, maybe they are, maybe somebody is missing a limb and they're younger, or they use a wheelchair, or my son has Down syndrome. So physically he looks different. That's one of the things that may be different about him. And so people stare, and people look at you, and they make assumptions about you without even knowing you. And I'm guessing that happened to you also.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it hasn't, like, 100% stopped. I mean, it's an interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, my mouth is crooked, and once in a while, it doesn't happen quite as often as it used to, but someone will just be like, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And I always know that, what's wrong with your mouth, and so they kind of also, and I mean, sometimes, and I talk about this in the book, like, sometimes the questioning is the like, the assault. That's not quite the right word, but that itself is like, I'm just trying to go about my day, And I mean, and I think something you spoke about actually back in your TED Talk was around, like, this is normal for us. This is like, and so you kind of get, and you were talking about how your son's younger siblings were like, this is just my brother. And I think like, you just kind of get used to things. And I mean, seeing a new doctor, I always have to brace myself because that is, for a long time, I didn't have a family doctor. And, I also had constant ear infections in my good ear, my only hearing ear. And I would go and they'd be like, oh, well, let's just check the other one. And then, of course, they would meet skin and they'd be like asking all these questions. And also, they're always like, your mouth is very asymmetrical. And I'm like, yes, I know that. Um,
Like you didn't know, like you didn't notice.
like being a woman in the society, like I
Like you've never looked in a mirror. Okay.
Yeah. And I know sometimes that question, they're thinking of the science of it. They're thinking, are you having a stroke or whatever? But, there is kind of also this curiosity kind of takes over and your body becomes reduced to the spectacle that you have to explain to other people, which is itself, taxing after a while.
Yeah, it's exhausting. You would always feel like you're on guard, right? You walk into a room and it's like, okay, you know when someone's looking at you. You know this, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know when I know when someone's staring at my son. I see it before anybody else sees it. Um, my daughters used to get very upset when they were younger, right? I'll never forget we were going into a restaurant. There was a big wait at the door and we were waiting. And, Beckett was, just whatever. He was sitting there waiting with us. And there were these other kids there and they were staring at him. And I mean, I saw it, but my youngest was really mad about it. And she came over to me and she said, those kids over there are staring at him and I'm going to go say something. I'm going to go tell them to stop staring. And I was like, okay, well, so we don't have to do that here in the restaurant. Like, like it's okay. Like we can just, let's just not. But I thought it was so interesting that she saw it and it made her angry. And then it made me think about why did, like we do stare. We stare at other people. I stare at someone when they're really beautiful. I stare at someone when they're wearing something fantastic. Have I ever stared at somebody because they're different? Of course I have. I'm a human being, right? But I'm different about it now than I was when I was 13, obviously. But it makes me think, what do we teach our children? What are we teaching others about the beauty of life? And the beauty of life is that we're not all the same.
Oh, and not only that, like difference, bodily difference is a way that we can elevate the human experience because having a different body can shows the creativity of the human form. And not that, sometimes function can be limited in certain kinds of ways. I don't want to take away that. But also, like, with my mouth, some people who have read the memoir are like, but that's just your mouth. That's just Kate's mouth. And I'm like, yeah, it's just my mouth and it's not ugly. It's a different expression of the human experience. And I have learned so much from other people who express themselves, their body expresses themselves differently. What a beautiful thing that we have all these different ways that we express bodies. I'm thinking of like the trans experience has taught us so much about what it means to be human. And that, hey, this thing that we thought like gender is this or this, it's for a lot of people, maybe it's somewhere in between or completely different. And like, what a beautiful thing for me to know about being human and for my own journey about being human. And I think we have so much, there's so much that if we're living in a society that is constantly like, here's the narrow definition of what it means to have a body. And if you don't fit into this, you either have to have plastic surgery and I think that that's one thing. The other thing I think is important for kids to know is that, when you are being stared at, that is not about you. And I think that that is something that is so hard, especially when you're like at that age. That is about somebody else. And, and I think we're like part of writing this memoir was like, I want to push this quote unquote problem of my body back on the society who's like afraid of my body, because that doesn't have to, that's not my problem, and we really need to be learning how to um not even like embrace, like not just accept, but embrace and see the value in difference, and because it's so valuable.
Yeah. Everything you said, yes. And it's interesting that I don't know where I saw this, but it was about, how we define things, like somebody who is trans who is having a surgery. We describe a surgery for, a woman who has breast cancer or is at risk of breast cancer is having, a mastectomy. But if you're trans, it's not. It's top surgery or it's gender reassignment surgery. It's the same surgery, but it has a different definition. And but why?
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, I don't know either, but I mean, it speaks to what you just said, right? It's like this is us as a society labeling things in certain ways that right? And then it makes us it's so fascinating to me.
it's fascinating to me too. And like, right after my birth, I got this name, anosha, which is the condition of being born without an ear and some, they call it facial microsomia. I don't even like, I researched all these terms like as I was writing the book and as I was looking through medical records. But once you define something, once it has a medical diagnosis, you are then in the medical system. You are, and I think like I'm sort of coming away from a little bit from what you were saying, but like the way that we perceive things definitely influences whether it's a disability or not, even, right? And so once I had that name, atresia anosha, it's like, okay, so now that we have a medical name, here's the medical solution.
Right. Because we can then put you in this box over here. You get to go in this box over here, whereas somebody else goes in this box over here, because that's what we like to do also. We like to put people in there, you know.
Yeah, we like to put them in their boxes and, oh, if you can't pay attention for a certain amount of time, you have a disability, we're gonna put you on medication because that's the only like, that's the solution. Not never mind that we live in, like, this world that is literally falling apart around us, right? Like, "Oh, you're anxious." Like, who isn't anxious? Like, that is the normal response right now, you know? But, we do tend to medicalize, um, the way that, human beings are. And so absolutely.
It's so true. Um, I before I have I have so much more I want to talk to you about, but we like to thank our guests for being here, and we want to thank them, and so we always ask our guests to choose, a Canadian registered charity of their choice. You chose About Face, and we are going to make a donation in your name to About Face. And I've never heard of About Face, and you were just telling me a little bit about them before. What are some of the things they do?
So, About Face Canada is an organization specifically does advocacy work and education specifically around people with facial differences. So, a facial difference is anything that's from the neck up. So, it includes missing ears and any other kind of facial difference. So, they've built a community, they do education, they do advocacy work. They're an amazing organization. And, especially like in these kinds of times, where body difference, if we look south of the border, it's like a crime all of a sudden again, like these horrible things that are happening there. And so it is one avenue of a way to kind of push back against that and to educate.
Well, thank you for choosing them, and thank you for telling us about them, because I've never heard about them before, and now I do. About Face Canada. Awesome. Thank you. Your experience is different than everybody else's, but also similar to other experiences when it comes to, writing about trauma, writing about would you describe is I mean, you went through your medical records. That couldn't have been easy.
That was, yeah. So I had gone to Sick Kids just to like to check it out. Like, and it looked very different. And I remember feeling very kind of turned around. And then I went to the basement and medical records and I'm like, oh, can I get those? And part of me was like, I hope they say no. I hope they've destroyed them by now because I was in my, 30s. Um, and they're like, yeah, we have them. So I, they photocopied them all, and I couldn't even wait until I got back to my house. I went into the cafeteria and I read them all right there. And it's an interesting thing when you're writing a memoir, because there's like two yous. There's the you that's the character. So the character is going through or being described in this medical way. So very reductive language. The operative reports were the hardest because those are the ones I didn't witness, and they took the human out of it. It was like patient, we moved the head to the side and put like and so like I wasn't even a person in those. And then also this was a story that doctors told about me, so this wasn't essentially my story. And I get in that in the memoir of like, that's your story. There's a story on my skin because I've had and then there's the story, you know and I think in their minds they're this heroes of this, saving this poor young child from herself. So the medical records were hard to read, as me as a person, as the character in them. As a writer, I was almost excited because you read them and you're like, this is so bad that this is good. Like this is I'm so gonna write about this. And so I think kind of it's a way to kind of like, as a human I was horrified, as a writer I was delighted, I think, in some ways.
Right. Uh, What you didn't write this book overnight.
It did not.
This took you a long time.
Yeah, 10 years.
Was that because the time wasn't right? You had to do it in small bits. Writing trauma is hard. What do you tell other people? Other people must ask you advice on, right? They must ask you advice on, how do I do this? Is this going to take me 10 years? Is this going to take me 20 years? Is this going to
I think like, I mean, a couple of like, there were a lot of other things happening in my life, so I wasn't working on it consistently. Um, but it takes as long as it takes, and I think that that's kind of like, I could have published a book 6 or 7 years ago. It would have been a different book, because I think in the writing you're also discovering the story, and I wanted to give myself the space to discover the story. And so part of that was taking my time. I think in early drafts, there was more anger, but I needed to write those drafts because like I needed to get the catharsis out. A couple of things I do have, like, in terms of advice for people writing trauma. Um, Number one is knowing if you're ready. And I think knowing it, we have this idea that writing is always healing, but sometimes if we're not ready to write about certain trauma, it actually just re-injures us. So knowing when we're ready involves like asking, like, I think the thing, like, as writers, we're seekers of meaning. So do I have the meaning? Can I make meaning out of the experience? And if I can't, sometimes the writing of the book is making meaning, right? So for me, writing it, it's like, oh, I had all of these surgeries and like didn't even get the ear finished, and what a waste. And it's like, but I'm going to write about it so that, maybe someone else will learn, like, understand something or feel less alone in their own struggles. Um, And so if you can make meaning out of it, if you've had some time to heal, and time doesn't mean like chronological time. Time is like have I been on a bit of a healing journey on it? And then if you decide yes, keep the writing time bound. And number one, practice self-compassion. I can't emphasize that enough because, when especially when we're writing about our own lives, often we feel shame about things that we shouldn't feel shame about, but of course you can't just tell your psyche, don't feel shame about that. So if you can meet that with self-love and that self-compassion, it helps you. It's sort of this the light that in that tunnel for you. So practice that self-compassion. If it if the writing ever does start to feel unsafe, just stop. That's also practicing self-compassion. So I think that that's probably number one for me.
Yeah, that's really good advice and things I hadn't thought of. And because, I mean, you're writing a story about really you as a little girl, right? I know it's a lifetime story, but it starts as, a baby girl, brought into the world. And, uh, and that's why I find, the story that you tell, and I don't mean to call it a story because it's your life, but it's the way you tell it is so tender and and um I mean that as the greatest compliment because it's not easy to write about your own experience and be tender.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Oh, well, that's lovely. I'm so glad it comes across that way. Like I just first and foremost wanted to be human in it. Like, and I think that to try to write it as authentically as I can, and through that experience, like my seeing my mother is also human, and my parents is human, and they're going through this with me, and um I think it's such a human story, really. And I think it's also quite like you say, a universal story because, we all have those experiences of feeling like you don't belong and how do we navigate that? And how do we learn? There's so many people who aren't friends with their bodies. They're like, I mean, this is not just me here, and for whatever reason, and how do we kind of get to ourselves to a place where we can have that love and feel that love? And yeah,
And you're right. This isn't a story about a baby born without an ear. This is a story about somebody who was told they were different, and the medical system said the best thing was to change you, to make you more acceptable to others. And you just said that, this is a universal feeling, right? For many people about their bodies. And that's what this book is about because I just turned to page 213 and I read about you, laying in the dark and I don't want to be in my disgusting body anymore. I rolled onto my stomach and pressed my face into the stuffing of my pillow. I pressed until blotches and squiggles of electric blue danced on the inside of my eyelids. Feet and hands numbed. The world outside flickered and dimmed. And you you are a beautiful writer, and this book is a gift to everyone, and I hope everyone reads it. I really do, Kate, because it's so beautiful. It's called It Must Be Beautiful to Be Finished. I don't know who did the art cover, but holy moly, it is incredible.
Michelle Vrenna.
It's gorgeous. And it's pink, like I'm wearing and is behind you, the colors, right? So your website is Katie Gies, that's GIES.com. You are on Instagram at Katie, Katy Gies. And you're on Blue Sky now at katiegies.bluesky.social. And you're on Facebook at Kate Gies. You're everywhere.
I'm everywhere. So the it's KATEGIES, kategies.com for the website, and then Katie Gies for the Instagram, and I'm on Blue Sky. Yeah.
You're everywhere. And your book came out in January. It's everywhere that you find your favorite books, and I highly recommend it. Thank you so much, Kate. You're amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. You are too, Tamara. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.